welcome everybody. Welcome to this book talk event that's being put on by the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. My name is Dan Wong. I'm a professor here. I'm also the faculty co-director of the Tamer Center for Social Enterprise. I could not be more pleased to introduce Majora Carter, Hunts Point's very own Majora Carter, coming to visit us here in West Harlem in Manhattanville to talk about her new book, which is right here. If you haven't read it, it is enthralling in so many ways. It resonated with me in so many ways as well. There's a bit of a bio that I'd like to read about Majora, but I'd like to add in a few things that I learned along the way from reading her book as well, which I think are worth mentioning. But Majora is a real estate developer, urban revitalization strategy consultant, MacArthur Fellow, and Peabody Award-winning broadcaster. She is responsible for the creation of numerous economic developments, technology inclusion, green infrastructure projects, policies, and job training and placement systems. She currently serves as the Senior Program Director for Community Regeneration at Groundswell Inc., and she is the author of the best-selling book, a new book, Reclaiming Your Community as well. Let me also say that Majora is also one of the first folks ever to give a TED Talk. And that is pretty incredible. If you haven't seen that, it's very compelling. Talks about kind of in many ways the mid to early part of this project that she's been on, that she's going to take us on a journey of. And let me also kind of say something about this book that deeply resonated with me. One of my kind of domains as a researcher is that I study social networks and migration, that's global migration. And the topic of a series of projects I worked on was about return migration. And this resonated with me a great deal because one of the things that I think Majora is going to tell us about is a particular kind of strategy for thinking about how to revitalize communities, which is about retaining and attracting talent back. And that's really important to think about. It's not without its detractors, as I learned in my kind of research as well. It's a provocative thesis, but it's also something that I think we can learn a lot from. So we've, I think, many different themes about what community means, about what revitalization means as well. So I'm really excited to learn straight from Majora herself. Thank you so much for being here.
So Dr. Wang, that was like the best introduction ever, and in part because I really want to see that research. So could you all move over so because I can't see you over here because I realize I have to speak in this so that y'all out there can hear it. So I will stand by the microphone and press my little thingamajiggies. So thank you so much for having me. It's an interesting time to be here, but I'll tell you about that later, like why I kind of had like a little weird deja vu, but I won't say that. I'll tell you why until the end of the talk. But yes, that is the point. So this is my book. It is a crazy little book that I can't believe I actually wrote at all, ever. But and what I did in this book is actually put the glossary up front because I do use some words and some phrases that are not really the kind of thing that most people talk about. Like, for example, instead of using the phrase poor or underprivileged or under-resourced, I actually call those kind of communities low status. Which is a phrase, I did not make that up, but what status implies is something that's sort of almost like immutable to a certain extent. It defines something larger. And in the case of low status community where poverty is concerned, it's almost as if inequality is simply assumed. So that's why I use the term low status. And so just want to put that out there. And so, but going forward, and the other thing that I talk about is, let's just go from there. So this is, when you really stop and think about it, the kind of approach that we use is really based, we literally pulled a page out of the business, entrepreneurship manual. It's all about talent retention. And so if you've got a business and, you've worked really hard to get it to where it is and you're trying to build this kind of company culture and, you pour some resources in, you get your team free snacks and benefits and all that good stuff. Are you doing that so that your competition can hire them away? No, right? No, right? Of course not. But in low status communities, and with low status communities, they're the kind of places, whether they're inner cities or Native American reservations or all white, former Rust Belt towns where, the industry is come and gone. But those are the places where inequality is assumed. So in those places, there's actually almost a talent repulsion strategy. We're expected to measure success by how far we get away from those type of communities. And so when I grew up in the South Bronx, back in the 1980s, and actually I've got Lisa Andujar, who's here at Columbia. We went to high school together, the Bronx High School of Science. There was pretty much a talent repulsion strategy like in my neighborhood, for the people that grew up there. Okay, I'm not sure. Ta-da. There it goes. So this was my walk on the way to get to the subway to take me to the Bronx High School of Science, one of the best high schools in the country. Okay, and this was a crack den that I walked by, all the time. And, this was a very different community than what my father had moved into, back in the 1940s. And he was a big old Black man, one of the first, Black people in my neighborhood who bought a house, for cash on his way there. And then white flight happened, highway construction happened. What happened was that the financial disinvestment actually made it nearly impossible for anybody to get loans or other mortgages or any other kind of resources, to support their buildings. So the house that my dad bought in the 1940s was pretty much worthless by the time I grew up. Landlords were literally torching their buildings to collect insurance money because that was the only kind of capital that was available for them to put into their buildings and their properties. So with that kind of thing going on, what I saw on a daily basis, was this. And I kind of thought, this was the kind of thing, especially since my brother was killed when I was 7, part of the drug wars that happened there. There definitely was, the kind of crime that went on in the community, but it was also really, believe it or not, the kind of community that we stuck together. So even though we knew that there was danger, we also knew that there was a lot of love in our neighborhood too. But it still didn't matter because it still kind of created the kind of infrastructure, this noxious waste infrastructure, later on power plants, later sewage sludge treatment plants that basically came in to take over for the light industry that was there that actually did produce jobs. This, of course, had a negative effect, on the public health of the community. It had an effect on the way that we saw ourselves in our neighborhoods, and it was a tough place to be. So, but with all that to say, what we created out of all of this was just I knew enough to go, time for me to go. I literally, after my brother was killed and I watched the 2 buildings at either end of my block burn down at the end, of the summer, I knew going into the 3rd grade that I need to plan my escape. And I did. I used, my education to get me out. I did go to Bronx Science, Wesleyan University, and then I got myself into NYU as well. And that's when it sort of fell apart because I had to move back in with my parents because I couldn't afford a place of my own or even the dormitories, down there. So it was just I'd max out my student loan. And so it felt like a huge defeat, going back into the neighborhood. And it was one of those things where it was just I was done. But then I met, some awesome folks who were part of the arts community there and was just wait a second, but we're kind of alike. There's a connection. So I saw my neighborhood in a completely different light. But that's when we realized that despite all of this, the city and state were planning on building another huge waste facility on our waterfront that would have added actually almost double what we were dealing with here. And it was just wait a second, just when I started to see my community in a different light, that's when I started to love it and see people for the kind of beauty that was there. But then I realized all the art, all the creativity in the world is not going to save us. And, and honestly, because we have sort of this talent repulsion strategy within low status communities, I was nobody would care, would even notice if I was just one of the many, many, smart young kids that are get out of the neighborhood, grow up and, be somebody better. Nobody would have blamed me or anything like that. But I knew, I felt you know what? I see what's going on here. And it's because we are a poor community of color and thus politically vulnerable. That's why this is happening. And so I decided to stay. And so I definitely got involved in solid waste advocacy, to just sort of try to get the neighborhood, the city and our state to not view us as the repository for all the things that wealthier and whiter communities could afford to avoid. But then I also started thinking about, we know what we're fighting against, but do we know what we're fighting for? And we knew what people left the neighborhood in order to experience. We knew they wanted, great places for them, to work and play, to take their kids and all that kind of stuff, things that we did not have in our neighborhood. And so what I started thinking about was trying to be creative and getting things try to transform, dumps into parks. Literally we heard, hello. So, so we had literally heard about this, this sort of like a grant that was coming through the U.S. Forest Service for threatened American rivers in urban areas. And I was just like, well, okay. And this woman kept literally, her name was Jenny Hoffner, would come by and visit and, just tell us, that this resource was available. And, I knew, because we have this Bronx River in the neighborhood. And like, I knew we had a river because I saw it on a subway map. Like literally, like it was a little curve, but I'd never been to this place. And if I hadn't had this crazy dog that pulled me into what I thought was just another dump on the waterfront, I never, ever would have seen it. But guess what that dog did? And so for that, I appreciate her very much. So I ended up writing that little proposal for a small seed grant for $10,000 and sort of used it, as like the beginning of a way for us to start thinking about how do we look at our neighborhood in a different way, like just physically create the kind of physical infrastructure that was not there before to give people hope for the future of their own community. And so transforming that little dump into a park was, at first it was kind of cool because it was radically different from the dump because there were literally piles of garbage and weeds over my head. And if I didn't have like an 80-pound dog, like leading the way, there's absolutely no way I would have gone up in there. So it did look a little different, which was great. Oops. Okay. So somebody's gonna have to help me get rid of this so I don't mess it up. Just click share? Yeah. Oh, look at that. So we had to, so I'm totally a Mac girl. So, but anyway, we had this, so we started thinking about, or rather the community started telling us the kind of things that they would go and experience. So to outside of the neighborhood. So of course we started working on things like bringing programming to this spot. And so unless you're like this guy who just liked to roller skate all by himself because he was weird like that, you actually wanted to have people around you. So we started doing things like we did environmental stewardship programs. We did movie nights, we did like senior citizen dance parties, just anything to get people down to the waterfront, canoe rides, literally like a little circle, like right around the mouth of the park, just to get people down there. And this, I have to tell you, still, every time I look at it, it just makes me smile. This is one of my favorite pictures on the planet because you can see I am literally just posing and ready for my close-up because I'd worked 7 years to get to that point, and I was like, I want a good picture to memorialize it. And I got one. They're doing all the work because I'm done. So, and this was us at the groundbreaking, announcing a $3 million fund to support this little thing that went from this dump. And actually, so remember, this was like back in the 90s, and before we had cameras on our phones. So we weren't documenting everything. This is literally it after at least like 6 cleanups that I hadn't even thought about taking a picture of because I was like working so hard. So this is what it looked like at one point. But trust me, it was even worse. But so it went from that to this, and then to this, which is the Hunts Point Riverside Park as it is this right now. Or it's actually literally the day after it was, all the sod was laid. And it's become this really beautiful thing in the neighborhood that people were just like, wait, is that for us? Like that was a real question that I can't even tell you how many times I heard. Is this for us? It's really pretty. Like, we don't get things like this in our neighborhoods. It's like, well, you got it now. Now what you gonna do? Enjoy it. So, but what was fascinating, and I did get married there back in 2006, and that is the dog that pulled me into the dump. Her name is Xena. Yes, she was named after the warrior princess. It's pretty much all I watched on repeat back then. I was a very boring person, and that's okay. I thought Xena was awesome. If you haven't seen it, you should. But anyway, but it was an awesome place to get married. But really what it did was speak to, creating the kind of lifestyle infrastructure within a community that made people feel like, wow, like I could hang out in my own daggone neighborhood. How cool is that? And we won awards for it. But when I stopped and think about it, again, we were led like the bright kids, the ones who were definitely sort of like destined to be the brain drain element of a community, the smart ones, whether they're artistically, academically, or athletically inclined, we're led to believe like you measure success, like there are gifted and talented programs, there's other arts programs. And it's sort of like the nonprofit world expects you to leave. And it's also, it tells you, it's like, you can't really be anything in your own community. However, even when I was a little kid, like I said before, there were always sort of amazing people in my neighborhood, always. And like now is no different. So, we are entrepreneurs, we're filmmakers, we're people, who write incredibly successful blogs that have like a gajillion and a half views and stuff like that. They're medical professionals, and this lady on the this side, you know, with the Coze with My Rose t-shirt. Her name is Noelle Santos. She has this like incredibly wildly successful, you know, bookstore wine bar. She coupled her two favorite, you know, passions, you know, and you know, so like it's called the Lit Bar, lit for literature, lit for tipsy, kind of like that. And it's wildly successful. It is up in the Bronx. Like she's a Soundview girl. I'm Hunts Point. It's all good. And, you know, people like Marcus Samuelson, of course, you know, the celebrity chef kind of comes and hangs out, you know, up there every now and then. The young man in the middle of the photo on the bottom, his name is Christian Navarro. And he's an actor, and he got his like breakout role in 13 Reasons Why. And so he's doing really well even now, which makes me very, very proud of him. And he's just, you know, his family grew up. He still is in the neighborhood, coming by to see his family who still lives in the neighborhood. But again, you know, if we're led to believe that that you can't really amount to anything if you stay in our communities, right, in a low status community. So, and, you know, I think, and it's the nonprofit industrial complex kind of like, again, sort of creates these, you know, and supports, and our government too, but it supports this whole idea that, you know, you take the talent out so they can grow up and be somebody. And it's kind of like, And so for us as a neighborhood, in Hunts Point in particular, we've had more kids graduating and going to college over the past just 7 years, rather than, you know, than the past 30. Like believe it or not, I was actually one of the last kids from my neighborhood to go to Bronx Science. And we're going on our 38th year. So I still can't believe that that's actually
Still look great.
well, I thank you, but dag, I feel pretty gosh darn good too. But it was sort of crazy that it took another 30 years to get like another person into New York City specialized high school from our community. But anyway, but now we've got more kids graduating, going to high school and then to college than we've had in like prior to that in a long, long time. So, but when we ask these young kids, you know, like, what do they think, you know, about the community? They'll literally say, oh, well, we need more homeless shelters, you know, more affordable housing, you know, for really poor people, but you definitely need the homeless shelters because that's probably where people are going to end up. You need more programs for kids, even though they're like only like a couple of years older than the kids they were talking about, to keep them out of trouble. You needed, let's see, more health clinics because everybody's got diabetes and obesity and things like that. So we're just preparing for like what's there, and, you know, make sure that you have enough to deal with that. And then, so then we'd ask them, the follow-up question was like, well, if you're, you know, so all signs are pointing to you graduating high school, getting into a good college, getting a career. Are you planning on coming back here? And they would visibly recoil, visibly. And the things that they would come up is like, well, why would I do that? Like, you know, I'm going to grow up and be somebody. It's like, I'm getting my education. It's like, I'm not going to stay in a place like this. Those were all the things that they talk about were the markers of poverty that was a stain that they knew they could wash off, or felt they could wash off, because you don't ever really wash it off, you know, when you get out of a neighborhood like that. And those are some stories in my book, like that stain that I felt was attached to me, both at Bronx Science and even at Wesleyan, you know, when people found out where I was from. And so to them, they're just like, well, I can reinvent myself and be gone. And but when we looked at it, we realized that what they were responding to were the kind of things that the nonprofit industrial complex were absolutely, you know, working toward. And because to them, it seems as though they viewed poverty itself. And yes, we are one of the poorest congressional districts in the country. I get sick and friggin' tired of like every other politician talking about us that way. And it's just like, we also have some really amazing things going on, but why don't you talk about that? But that's not what they do. So that's why I'm not a politician, as you can probably tell. But if we are thinking, is poverty a cultural attribute, and that's the way they act, you know, it's since all the programming that's being designed for places like that sort of preserves it, supports it, you know, what does an industrial complex do? It seeks mostly to perpetuate itself, not to solve a problem. So, but when we started asking people, it's like, well, wonder if they feel that way. And so we didn't ask them, is poverty a cultural attribute? Because that's like a real weird policy wonky thing to ask normal people. But you can certainly ask them, so what are you looking for in the community you desire? And that's when they come, you don't even have to ask. They're just super happy to be asked. And so they would say things like, they wouldn't talk about any of the things that were there, but they would absolutely talk about the things that were not. And they would talk about the places where they spent their money, you know, and that's where their hearts were, which was not in the community. And it wasn't like people would say, we don't want to stay because of the crime, because especially in our neighborhood, the crime rate's been going down like consistently. even, believe it or not, during COVID too, like unlike every other place in the city, like I feel pretty gosh darn safe. But they wanted the things that they couldn't have, whether it was housing that matched their income, because let's just say, and many of them are like those smart kids that got the good job, but housing wasn't being built in their community to suit them, that they could even qualify to afford to get into, because they were only making extremely low income housing. So it was that they wanted to be inspired by the people around them, and sometimes even be the inspiration for other people too. It's like a very basic human need. Like you want to have things around you that make you feel good about yourself. And so, but when we really stop to think about it in low status neighborhoods, the two things that we see the kind of real estate development that we see happening there. One is gentrification. I think people automatically know what that is. It's sort of like, developers come in supported by the government that, so that there's like, the type of building, the kind of community that's not for the people that are already there. Even though, let's just be real about it, like people that are often displaced in those communities or in those communities often like the same kind of things too. So, and that's generally why they leave in the first place if they can. Or the other kind is something we call poverty level economic maintenance. And so, but it's the kind of industries that make money, but the people in the communities that have to experience them aren't the ones doing well as a result of it. So you can always find all sorts of food in low status communities, but it's not the kind of diverse and healthy options. It's mostly just the ones at the low end of it, fast food joints and greasy spoons of that nature. If you wanna, you can find places to spend your money too, but generally they're not the kind of quality that you would often like. So people will tend to leave the neighborhood in order to find quality that they like. Again, I love a bargain just like anybody else, but if in low status neighborhoods, what you often find is those dollar stores are pretty much the main retail option. I've literally been in parts of the country in various cities where there's literally like on a 3-block radius, like 3 different dollar stores. It certainly is in my neighborhood. And pharmacies, multi-billion-dollar economic engine in this country. So much of it is supported by the kind of lifestyle conditions that are prevalent in low status communities, whether or not they're things like, and they're from all over the place. They look different in different parts of the country, whether it's rural or urban or suburban, but this is what happens. And there's also plenty of places to get self-medicated, things like this, the landscape as well. If you want to save your money, you're not really going to be able to find places to either you're not going to find many banks or credit unions, or investor clubs, in those neighborhoods at all. But you'll find, payday loan places and check cashing stores and things of that nature, things that charge you a premium for using your own daggone money. And last, definitely not least, huge quantities of federally subsidized, quote unquote, affordable housing, and almost exclusively for the lowest income bands. And so I preface this because there's another phrase that I use in the book called the Majora Carter fan club, which you will find out a little bit more about. I refer to those as my haters because I don't like, anything associated with hate attached to me. So they're my fan club because they do spend a lot of time thinking about me. That's all I'm saying. But let's be real clear. What I'm struggling with here is not that I don't like poor people at all. What I do have an issue with is the fact that the concentration of poverty and the fact that there are certain entities and industries that make a buttload of money off of it. And all of the issues associated, with that concentration of poverty, everything from bad policing and the associated incarceration, poor health outcomes, poor educational attainment, just higher rates of people feeling mentally stressed. Even more, the fact that people are paying more for their energy burdens. Like seriously, all of this is statistically there. That's what I have a problem with. But when we still concentrate, but then when we consistently concentrate it, both the nonprofit industrial complex and our government consistently says that this is an okay thing to do. That's what I have a problem with. And so with that, when we think about the fact that part of so I would also another be really clear. One of the things that I want to mention is that, So there's two types of real estate development, or poverty level economic maintenance and gentrification. And so that gentrification thing that really bothers people, which I understand, but I want to be, when we think about gentrification, you should understand that it doesn't happen when you start to see things like doggy daycares and cute cafes in neighborhoods where they weren't there before. It starts to happen when we tell people, and people in low status communities believe that there is no value there. And by association, everything that they have has no value. So they'll sell early and cheap when they do have property. Okay, so these are the kind of, like, we don't really see much of these in my neighborhood anymore because we literally take them down when we see them. So people realize, like, we just need to stop putting them up, which is great. But we posted this actually a while ago, you know, on the gram, and I love that, you know, people were really like engaging with it at first, and they were just like, one of them, this is a someone that I connected with in Baltimore, who's actually has her children call up the folks that you know, call and harass her because they're part of investor groups, which is another term for predatory speculators, who, you know, want to buy her house for cash, and the kids are just like, could you kindly get away from my inheritance? Because that's what this is about. It is about generational wealth for people in low status communities. So, but first we have to think about the strategy that we've used as a talent retention strategy. And it's that thing that, oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back to that. So in the talent retention strategy in and of itself is the kind of thing that makes you, is the thing that makes you want to stick around. The same way it's like, you know, if you're working for a company and, you know, you love the culture there, you feel valued and respected, you'll stay, even if you're making a little bit less money, right? That's how it is. But in low status communities, that is not what we do. So this is the strategy that we've been deploying, you know, in the work that we do around the country to try to keep this thing going. So first things first, we are humans. We like nice things. We want to see beauty around us. We respond to that. You know, if you're feeling socially isolated and excluded because of the environment around you, often that will have an impact on you and how you act. It's just the way it works. So let's just make our environment something that makes us feel like happy to be around, both the built environment as well as the natural environment. You want to promote community, but, you know, like I love those developers that are just like, oh, we're going to build extra units for affordable housing up on top of what we're building already, and then we're going to build a community center. I'm sorry, I have never, ever, ever met anybody who was able to move out of a low status community to move to another place with more community centers. I've never seen that happen. They'll go to places that have like cool bars and cafes. That's what they want. And why would they not want that? We're like people, we like cool things. People wanted quality housing in a range of incomes. You know, they wanted to know their neighbors and feel like there was different types of people around. Nobody, and I mean nobody, even the poorest of poor folks want their poverty conflated with who they are as a human being. Nobody likes that. It's just it's a moment where you are, you know, and often has nothing to do with like how you got there, has often had nothing to do with you. And people wanted to feel good about where they are. So that cracked den that I used to walk by on the way to the subway, on the way to Bronx Science, this is part of like the manifestation of our talent retention strategy. So that same crack den is now the Boogie Down Grind Cafe. Yay. And so that we started that literally as a talent retention approach, because we realized that people were leaving their neighborhoods to experience things just like this, in ways that made people feel like they had cool things to do. And so we opened this up, and we're able to sort of like be the kind of vessel where beautiful people like this young lady right back here who hosted this awesome project called the Black Table. Oh my God, it was like walking into like the coolest like Essence magazine. Like y'all were just so pretty. I can't even tell you, but it was really cool. But to have like to be that space, like in our own community where people could feel like I can be my beautiful, creative, fabulous self here, you know, and get really good, you know, specialty coffee and, you know, craft beer and good sangrias and mimosas and all that kind of stuff right in my own hood. that was a really kind of crazy thing to experience, you know, in our own neighborhood. Then Beyonce came in, and well, she didn't actually come, but we got a little grant, and we opened up some outdoor seating during COVID, which was just like also really kind of super doggone cool. And it just created this really kind of beautiful vibe. And for me, like opening up this coffee shop was we did the list, like asking people, where do you go and spend your money? You know, and so since at that point, very early in my real estate development days, I didn't know anything about spending other people's money, which is the first thing the real estate developers like learn when they grow up in those industries. I didn't know that. So I saved money and started this little coffee shop. Because in part, I realized like coffee is a part of everybody's culture. And, you know, it's like comes from the blackest and the brownest places, you know, on the planet. And it is literally the blackest beverage on the planet. And I was just like, why is it suddenly like the purview of only like white guys with like beards and, you know, and skinny jeans? Like, no, why? Like, let's just reclaim some of this, like, you know, the retail part, which is the most profitable part. And so that's what I thought we were doing, you know, in creating this space. But, you know, not everybody thought so. And it was really fascinating because, again, the nonprofit industrial complex, which I think kind of, again, feeds, you know, this idea that poverty is a cultural attribute in low status communities. We were protested, you know, in the first couple years we were around. And it was a crazy, crazy moment. And this is, you know, well, Majora Carter sells out the Bronx one coffee at a time, because coffee shops are the harbinger of gentrification, even if they're 100% locally owned. But again, that's like the crazy part, I think, of even white supremacy that kind of leads people that, you know, in our own communities to believe that somehow or another, if you're not seeing poverty as part of our culture, then you're somehow inauthentic. So I was a sellout because, you know, or according to them, you know, since we did that. And, you know, so this was a kind of crazy thing to like walk into. I have to tell you, if you've never been protested, I wouldn't advise it. But it was one of those moments where you just realize, okay, I'm a pooper, get off the pot. And so I'm here. So what am I going to do? But what was fascinating was because what it did was two things. One, it literally, well, first, the irony of it all was that the day we were protested was the same day that we had so there were like 10, 15 people outside with big bullhorns and big banners. And inside the cafe, there were about 40 people who had assembled for a workshop about low and 0% interest loans for the low income homeowners in the community, as well as the, you know, as well as aspiring and the current small business owners in the neighborhood. And the next day I was, you know, also just like, I don't know if anybody's gonna even come back. I mean, there was like people calling me everything but a child of God, like on the street really loudly. What does that mean? And you know what? The beautiful thing was that the next day we had the single best day at that cafe up to that day. Like people who were just like walking by and who'd never even been to the cafe before walked in and were just like, that's not what you're doing. So you know what? I don't even like coffee, but I'm a support today. And it was just like, so folks understood what we were trying to do, or most of them, some obviously didn't, but for the most part, people did. And what was really fascinating, you know, was that, you know, it was also sort of like the beginning of a whole other part that we were doing, which was basically like using, you know, the tools of capitalism, like in particular crowdfunding investment campaigns, in order to get other folks to invest their, into places like the cafe. So this is one of our very first investors that decided that they wanted to be a part of building their own community. And this is an old rail station, a former rail station, actually designed by the same architect that did the Woolworth building, Cass Gilbert. And so while at the same time he was doing that in the Supreme Court building, he was doing these little rail stations because back in the early 1900s, railroads was like the internet, you know, that's where like money was being like lumped in. And so of course you had a star architect doing it, and that was Cass. But of course it started to roll down. And but by the time the 40s came around, all of those places were just, those rail stations either fell into disrepair, or in the case of this one, they were turned into little mini strip malls. And so the guy who owned the ground lease actually did own a strip club in this spot. And he like charged all the rest of the tenants. And, you know, he had just signed a 30-year lease for about $9,000 a year. So he was doing fine. I mean, just fine. And then he died. And so then Amtrak, who owned the building, was just like, no, we're not going to do this. And it took a while, but basically everybody left the building. And that's when I asked them, because it felt like the early days, of like my childhood watching, like buildings be vacant and just like, and it sent a chill, I think, because this was literally the gateway into the neighborhood and you had to walk by it to get to the subway. And I was just like, and my office was right across the street from it. And I was just like, no, I can't do this. So I cold called Amtrak and said, hey, interested in doing a little something, at this building. And it was just like a real cold one. And I was very vague because I had no idea. And within 2 days, they called me back and was just like, what do you want to do there? And I was like, I'll tell you in a week or so. And then we set up a time. And basically what we're doing now is we're transforming it into an event hall. But before we even, once I realized they were interested, that's when we hired some local kids from the neighborhood to work on a mural project, just to like brighten the space up a little bit. And they became heroes of the neighborhood because they were just adorable. And so again, we went back to that list that the community itself had told us about, which was all about how do you create more, basically either family friendlies, but cool spaces that make people feel good about being where they are. And so that spot is the reason why why I was actually born in Hunts Point, because my dad was a Pullman porter. And even though that his line was the New York, New Haven line, he had actually, and this rail station was that line. So he had actually been out in LA doing like some other kind of dead end trip over there and was coming back. He had won $15,000 in cash at a horse track. He played the ponies. And when he came home, carried $15,000 in cash in a satchel, made it home, and plunked it down, and it was the Sacco family, that was their name, the Italian family on Menida Street, and bought the house in cash. And so 7 of my 10 brothers and sisters were raised in that house. But the rail station, because there was talk that the rail station was going to reopen, it never did, but that's why he bought the house. And and his brothers and rails would literally, even though the station wasn't open, they would slow down the train so my father could like amble up the embankment to walk the 2 blocks to my house, as opposed to going all the way down to Penn Station and taking the subway back uptown. So that was kind of exciting. So thank you, Daddy. But so this is what it looked like back when it was originally built. And this is what it looked like after. Mostly my husband and I were the first people that, literally took sledgehammers and crowbars to do the original demolition. So these are like the first pictures of the uncovered, the beautiful vaulted ceiling, that had been, covered by second floors and drop ceilings for 70 years or so. But then we wanted to show like, how do you create, we're calling it Bronxlandia. And we wanted to show like what it could look like and what the whole space could be, because it's going to be a multi-purpose event space and performance venue. So just last year, we decided to do a 1-day event just to give people a sneak peek about what could happen there. And we got a TPA, or a temporary permit to assemble, just to show what it could be. And so that was really super fun. So during the day, we did a pop-up shop, had local community vendors come in and sell all their stuff. And then in the early evening, the Bronx-born actor Malik Yoba had come up, and he's now a real estate developer and film director and television director, actually. And so he's done this series called I Build New York, which is all about let's see, how do you say it? It's about mostly real estate development in New York, but kind of through the eyes of like Black and brown, mostly developers and history. Like what is it like to do that? So I was actually featured in the first episode. And so we screened that. That was the early evening event. And then in the late evening, up until like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, we had both a hip hop and a rock showcase, which was super, super cool to just like see it used in that. And the acoustics are totally sick. It's just I'm so excited there. But we're working with a really amazing architect called Studio V. They're the same ones that did the Empire Stores out in Brooklyn, which is one of my favorite buildings in the world. And so we're really keeping, trying to look back at the original, structure and what we can bring back, but while, to preserve as much of it as we can, while actually creating, a certain level of openness that's going to allow us to really use that space. And we're totally, again, taking full advantage, of the SEC's, new rules rules around investing, crowdfunding investment strategies, which allows, unaccredited investors, with people that aren't making like, I think $1 million, have more than $1 million in assets and making more than $200,000 a year. So now normal people can do that, even though they're investing, a lot less, sometimes as little as $100, to have the same rate of return as someone who's putting in, $1 million into a project. So we're doing more of that as well to make sure that our local community has an opportunity to be a part of that as well. And so when I think about, where we are, so you know what I'm going to do? I think I'm going to go past this right now. But this, just because I really want to close with this thing. So this is the last project so this is an old rail station, and my dad this was his last job. He was actually a janitor here when he got older. That's what he retired from. And so it was it was a juvenile detention facility, just as bad as they all are, frankly. And it was a really interesting, time when both children's AIDS activists and also juvenile justice activists were like, this place sucks. Like, it's just bad. And it really is, it's just a horrible place. We need to close it. And they won. And the city decided to close the spot. It sat on 5 acres of land. And so I'd been thinking about things like mixed income housing and mixed use, development as a way to economically diversify, to deconcentrate the poverty that's in our community by actually building lots more housing, just to do that, not to like remove anybody, but literally to build more housing. It just seems like it made sense. This was 5 acres big. You can do a lot on that. So we actually, under the Bloomberg administration, presented this kind of program, about it. And it was so cool because, the head of HPD at the time was just like, this makes perfect sense, because we were talking about things like, mixed income housing, mixed use commercial development, of course, with some supportive housing, that really needed to speak to where folks needed to be. We did a real economic development analysis of where the jobs were, where businesses were, like what could be like the kind of sustainable businesses to come, to a community like that and actually support the development of more, creating, public and open space, is the great democratizer, because that's like so real. It's like you don't need money to participate, but everybody benefits and all your communities are better as a result. And then create like a real local, living economy by creating, how many times, figuring out how many times $1 can actually circulate throughout that economy. In low status communities, pretty famously, it's like one time and then the dollar's gone. So we don't want more of that. So, but what I've loved about it more was the fact that there was just, that I knew that this kind of approach, especially in post-industrial American cities where you had the kind of topography where there was like, residential real estate on one side and industrial on the other, it was always that little weird hinge area where they connected, and the kind of places where nothing really happened, but everybody knew something happened there. Like, for example, in our instance, you had the jail on one side, and then on the other side, there was a truck engine rebuilding parking lot. There was some illegal shops and some other like sort of actually very low grade, types of economic developments. But really what everybody knew in the neighborhood was happening there was that this was a place for truckers to pick up a prostitute and be completely unmolested, because nobody went there. And so, but interesting, what would happen if you totally changed the ground plane? If you actually had, the kind of street where there was like, entrances, for, a 3-shift, light industry, place. If there were, entrances to schools and businesses and schools. And so that there was almost became like a 24-hour city, but in a good way. And so things like that made it a very, very different place to be, because what we were trying to do was raise the bar for what passed for real estate and economic development within low status communities. And doing so, we did this really awesome thing where I put the idea out there forward and then worked on creating more of a, like the kind of team with more women and minority owned businesses as equity partners, not as like a sub or anything like that. It's like, nah, we all had equity. And or the plan was that we were all going to have equity. And we built this proposal with 1,200 units of mixed income housing, including 100 units of low income home ownership. And the whole idea there was that there would be opportunities for people to actually own something. We had more than 200,000 square feet of of a both mostly light industrial, manufacturing space, but also commercial, retail, some cultural, the whole shebang. And we were so excited about this project. And here we were in this sort of like, sort of 21 Jump Street kind of, team, and, we had white women and people of color as developers. And because I value diversity, we also had 2 white men on that were also leads on our project, because that's what I do. And but then the city did what it normally does, which was essentially say, we're going to do what we always do, and we're going to award this project to 2 all-white male development teams. And we're going to build exclusively low-income housing, and we're going to have a community center and a health clinic. That was that. And of course, I learned all about this. I knew it was going to happen, but it was released to the public on my 50th birthday. So I had to hear about it on every news station and every place else. And it was just like, but we did what we did, and we got there. And so what was fascinating is, so this is where I normally end, this talk, which is here, because this is Dr. King's quote, from a letter from a Birmingham jail. And it's literally one of my favorites in the world, because it's just about being impatient or tolerating the status quo that we all know isn't really working. And having that unavoidable impatience is exactly what I think makes us, the wanting and being human, shows like that we actually can do better if we all do better. And so the whole idea of reclaiming your community, it's about using a talent retention approach, really is all about recognizing that, where we came from doesn't mean we have to stay where we were. And it also absolutely means that we can create new opportunities for us to not necessarily move out of our neighborhood. When we can use real estate development as a transformational tool, if we also recognize that the people in our own communities are the keys to our economic and social recovery, period. And so if we can do that, we can show that that we can repair all of the social fabric in our country, in rural areas, in urban areas, and suburban areas, by actually recognizing that we can use the same kind of tools that have been used in other parts of our and higher status communities to support the development and wealth creation, generational wealth creation, and just the kind of cultural capacity within our communities. And because this is true, we can prove we don't have to move out of our neighborhoods to live in a better one. And thank you very much. Any questions? Oh, hi.
I was a graduate business school. I loved reading your book, and also a social entrepreneur myself. Work in the health equity space, and I wanted you to talk about kind of what's next. In other words, this was a pretty massive setback, and and I know, and anyone who's honest knows that would have been phenomenal.
Yeah.
So, what's next to move forward, talking about resilience and also the shocking things about that protest and the picture of you with the snake on it. When you're a visionary, you're really seen and get the barbs.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Sure. It was actually really funny because I actually, it was not in this building, but this campus. It was soon after that, and I did something with Columbia around that time, and I met one of he was doing the PR for one of the teams that won, and it was, and I can't even remember like the whole conversation, but it was basic. I kept my composure, but I remember feeling like, I can't believe I'm in the room with this, like somebody who just stole this thing from our community. I mean, not just me, but it's just like, you're building crap. But, looking back on it, like, I wish that And not that I think it would have helped if I'd just been like, hey, we should try to do something together. Because I don't think it would have, actually, it was done. The deal, it was done. I was not, and nothing that we were doing was a part of it. But looking back, I realized that between whether it's COVID, which I think kind of put a nice little head, on the fact that our communities really have been suffering from the kind of degradation, thanks to white supremacy, and it affects everything from health outcomes, to economic outcomes and the whole shebang. I am slightly more positive that now there definitely are folks who, in positions of power who are just looking back at the way the status quo development was done and going, we kind of have been white supremacist in our planning. And maybe that's why the wealth gap is what it is. And maybe we should consider doing things a little bit different. And so seeing small things like, is this not happening writ large? Like I'm not seeing, most, philanthropy, doing the kind of things that we've proposed, things like, you starting the kind of holding companies so that they could, like be faster than predatory speculators and buy property from people who really do want to sell, to give people from those same communities opportunities and time to buy those same homes, because it's not like they can't afford them. Some people spend more on rent than they do, on a mortgage. So that's possible, but we can't beat the speed of predatory speculators, whether they're private equity, or small or large ones. So little things like that, and they're not little things. The fact that there are some folks that are paying attention and trying to use whatever heft they have is encouraging to me. And the other really important thing is like seeing the response of, people in low status communities actually see themselves as the agents of real change, not just going, oh, well, we just need a little program so that the kids can get up and get out of here. But it's more like, why am I selling my parents' house? Like, why am I not led to believe that I can build a business and a life in my own community? Like, those are the things that really do excite me. And, we've seen it in our cafe where folks are just like starting businesses or staying local. And I think we need it from both sides, but ultimately, like, we've got to recognize that, our communities are valuable because we're in them. And then it's harder, for things to move beyond us. Yes.
Thanks so much for being here. I loved your book because I grew up in small town Kansas, and I'm obviously sitting here. So for a lot of reasons, it was really interesting to me. And I guess my question was, as a business owner yourself, what have you learned about what it takes to sustain a business in your neighborhood? Because I've seen a lot of like grants and like charitable, projects to start businesses, but then
Right.
go under in a few years. So yeah, just wondering what you've learned.
And and it's that's interesting that you say that, because in low status communities, there's always it's like everybody likes the ribbon cutting, for the projects, but maintenance, I don't care if it's a park or a business or anything like that, we don't see it. And that's so that, and especially if people are not coming from the kind of place where it was in the family. Like I've run I've just a good example is like I've run green job training and placement systems. And part of the biggest things that we did was like teach soft skills, right? Because for people who didn't grow up with the experience of having like a family member, even with a job, it was like little things like making sure you look busy when the boss is around. Like people just didn't know. So they would be like, I'm done. Okay. It was like, no, you look busy or you ask for more work or whatever. Like but if you don't know, you don't know. And I feel like that is often like how, the low status communities are kind of like that, how that whole nonprofit cycle perpetuates. Cause it's like, see, they couldn't finish. They're still not here, and it's just like, well, did we get to the point like afterward where it's like, once you get past your startup phase, like how else can you grow? And are we given that kind of latitude in order to actually build what we need? And the short and the long answer is no. And that's where I think one of the problem lies. Absolutely. Because that's a good point. I actually hadn't thought about that in a while. Yes.
Right.
hesitate to ask, I don't put more burden on you, but as for someone who has like class privileges and wants to get involved in this type of stuff, or even like alums or students of this school who wants to support the community that maybe be displaced in this area, what can we like? What should we be doing as allies, as supporters? Like we don't want to gentrify, but we want to support it.
Well, I mean, look, I feel like it's a good question, and everybody, has a role to play within, within communities that don't really even have like the privilege to understand what we're missing. Like honestly, I would have loved to have had somebody, who knew more than I did about real estate development be like, well, actually, that's not what you do. And, or let me show you how to like get to another, get to a real level. And, or let me introduce you to my broker who's not going to ream you, like things like that. And I feel like nobody wants to talk about those type of things in ways. I'm also trying, I'm sorry, I don't mean to not do this, but I want to make sure they can hear too. So I feel like that really is it. And as you start building out, your own, plans, who are you bringing on as partners? Are you actually working in those communities and really not just, sort of doing like the same kind of crap that always just gets done and gets funded well, but, are you actually listening to the community? Are you actually building up the next, generation of people who actually might have an interest in it? And I feel like those little things, because they're not little, they're the kind of things that actually show like, okay, I see you, and maybe like, who knows, this could be like your next partner. But instead, it's usually like somebody that, is just sort of like, oh, the way that it seems to me is that there's more of like, we're here to take care of you because, you're never really going to make it on your own anyway. And that's not helpful. Yeah. But Sharon, you're up, because I don't feel like it's a zero-sum game. It's really not, there's definitely more than enough to go around. And, and I think the more folks that actually say that, the healthier we all are. Yeah. Hi.
I have a question about the Majora Carter fan club.
Oh, okay.
And kind of your experience with protesters, detractors, as it were. The way kind of your book describes it and the way that you described it in person was that these folks kind of labeled the coffee shop as gentrification. And of course, you and your project don't see it that way. Can you talk about what would have been satisfying to those activists? Because my assumption, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that they might have also been concerned about their communities as well.
Yeah. Oh, no.
So what would they have preferred, or?
We've absolutely tried to engage and ask them. And the closest I got, and actually, Kanene over there, is this. It was part of this amazing, actually it was a comedy troupe, but did like some really hard-hitting kind of social stuff. It's called Black Issues, and portrayed it. They were Black British, folks looking at Black America, and it was just because we're all kind of weird, but to like the Brits, like we're really weird, and so I was actually, so they would interview real people, but in their character. And so when I was, that was another time I was protesting. and so like somebody like literally like got somebody to buy them tickets so they could come in and yell at me. And so from the stage I asked, and I think this is sort of like this is kind of it. So I asked them like, so what should I do? They were yelling at me about all the things I'd allegedly done. And then it was like, so what should I do? And the answer was not open a coffee shop. Okay, that's not an answer. That is not an answer. Tell me what I should do, and then we could have a conversation. But that is the closest I've gotten to an answer. And because I really don't, feel like we've been so just, put in this position where the authentic way that we operate, is from this place of, of poverty being just such a part of our culture. It's like either you're, doing a food bank, or you're, helping people get some kind of like tutoring program or something, but you're not like trying to deal with the wealth gap. You're not saying like, you know, how about we, you know, use the same kind of tools that have helped white America, you know, actually not have that kind of like wealth gap associated with them, you know, so that people in low status communities can do it. You know, why are we not? Why not that? You know, and I'm not saying that, you know, feeding hungry people isn't important, obviously, but I am going to say that's not all we are. So why are we treating ourselves? Why do you expect us to be treated that way? That's all. Yeah.
I have some online questions.
Yes.
One is, what convening spaces that are not community centers would you recommend for children, specifically preteen and adolescents? I appreciate all your thoughts, especially on coffee and as it ties back to predominantly Black and Brown communities. I'm curious as to which alternative facilities you see as a convening space for youth, specifically after school programs.
Yeah. So I've seen, you know, like bookstores like all over. I mean, literally, I was just in San Diego and, you know, in the Barrio Logan community, predominantly, you know, Mexican American. There's like a brand new bookstore that only hope. And it's just like, it's like kid central, like after school. Like, first of all, there are adults there who take care, who like, there's like, okay, we're here to make sure that we support these kids, but it's an adult space. And so I think that that's a really important thing, you know, as long as there's like the kind of, so I love bookstores that are designed like specifically for the community, you know, in mind, you know, obviously parks, you know, that actually have the kind of programming that make people feel really good about where they are. Oh, that's right. There's somebody out there. Hello. And, you know, and I think just like you can build it wherever you are, and like using the fact that there are people within your local community that are doing really interesting things, and how are you supporting them? You know, whether it's like, you know, buying local stuff, or they're the kind of farmers market and pop-up shops where you can engage people so they can see what enterprise looks like when someone that looks like them is doing it. And just being really mindful in that way that, you know, a community is not just a place, it's an activity. And yeah, granted, you need places to do it, but you also, you know, have to show support in that way. So I feel like there's almost never a loss of things one can do in a community, but you do have to like look for it. You absolutely do. You know, and also I feel like the other piece is being, is giving each other grace, you know, because we're all working this out, like, and you know, especially because we haven't had a coffee shop, you know, or a cute cafe in our neighborhood. Like, we didn't even have parks. So we're learning this as we go, like how to be. And yeah, I feel like that's a really important thing to ask of people. Yes.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about the debate around the cannabis industry, right? Because it's had a horrible, just devastating effect on communities of color, the justice system.
Yep.
And New York City, I think, announced like the first 100 licenses would be for people of color, right? But people also don't want to live next to a tobacco dispensary, right? In low status communities, why is that for business? So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Especially the kind that are popping up now. I mean, and they are foul. Like, I haven't even been in one, and I'm just like, no, they're not the kind of places that make you feel like, oh, I'm going to take my kid to learn about entrepreneurship. There's not that kind of place. So yeah. Like, again, it's kind of like the road to hell. I mean, it's good intentions, but haven't really done the kind of work. And so, and understanding, and I don't even know all that. I know enough about it to be super dangerous, which means I, you know, take what I say with a grain of salt. But I think it's very similar to kind of like the way that the federal, you know, grant operating system works. You know, which is the bar to enter is so high, and many folks on the ground are not even going to be able to enter. You know, whether it's like they need to get a match, or they've got to have like, you know, the kind of partner that has a balance sheet that's like 50 yards long, and, you know, they're not going to be able to get the kind of insurance that's going to be required. And then we're going to be like, oh, well, we tried. to give these licenses, but, and then they look the same. So I feel like that's something that, so it probably just needs to be like totally, taken like off the table and done over again. But this time to reduce the barriers to entry for legitimate businesses that are actually going to be the kind of places that can be supportive of local communities. Because yes, obviously I feel like it never should have been criminalized in the first place. Like all of the stupid sentences should be overturned. I think there's a whole bunch of things that need to happen. But I worry more about like the real profits that are going to be made, that they're not really going to happen in the way that are going to be supportive of those local communities. Because I think between education, and really crafting the policy right, it could be used as ways to help support those communities. But I just don't see it, not right now, not with what's on the table that literally I've seen in my own neighborhood. Yeah. Hello.
Hey, thank you so much, Majora, as usual. I'm just gonna say really quickly, it's way worse than what you depicted. Not my British accent, that is really bad on purpose, comedically, but the level of which they orchestrated purchasing, they didn't have the money, which is fine, to get tickets, got someone to buy them tickets. One had like it wasn't a switchblade, but it was something sharp that he like,
Oh, I didn't know about this.
yes, you didn't know. Yes, but it was, and he was rushing and he bum rushed the stage.
What?
Yes. So you were way on stage, so you didn't see all of the other machinations that.
Oh my God.
Mhm. No, yeah.
I'm glad I didn't know.
Yep.
All right.
So it was.
Or maybe I wish I did though.
It was worse. It was way worse. So my question is twofold. One, I think the Democratic Party, no one is apathetic and pathetic, but or breathes apathy because they're pathetic, right? But also they don't demystify the policies that they are enacting that actually are benefiting the people who are protesting and activating the most against what they perceive to be not a policy, right? So, and I know because she's talking about my company, Black Issues, so this is what I do, like community outreach, right? So like, what strategy are you doing to literally demystify and de-escalate the Majora fan club, which clearly we've talked about this before, right? And I've seen them, okay? And then two, in terms of policy, right? There's a smorgasbord of policies around affordable housing that actually make it non-affordable. Long story short, I had a fellowship with College Center Policy Study, and so I Deputy Mayor Dr. Off at the time, this was 2008, was celebrating in front of the Colin Powell Fellows and the Rockefeller Fellows how buying a brownstone in Bed-Stuy for $1 million was progress. And I got up in front of Colin Powell and everything, again, what do I have to do? And I was like, no, because they not supposed to do this. And I was like, no, what actually is happening is that you're pricing out people who live in Brooklyn, and then Manhattan is going to become a luxury. So where are people really going to move? It's going to be unsustainable. This was 2008. So this trajectory of policies to price people out has been going on for 20 years now, right, on paper, but really 30 years in the making from Jenkins, even though Jenkins didn't want it, definitely under Giuliani. So what are your thoughts on 420A, the affordable housing tax abatement for the developers? What are your thoughts on that? And then what are your thoughts on Hochul and Adams now? Do you think that they are amenable and have policies that could actually stop this hamster wheel of building a building 20% affordable, which actually prices out with all the market rate everybody that lives in that area? Yeah,
so some of the things, so again, I think, 428 is sort of like it's sort of like a symptom, like that's at the end of the line, and it happens because of all the other things. So some of the things that we're actually trying to promote, are things such as that low income, property owners are actually considered a protected class by the SEC. Because if you start there, than the kind of predatory speculation that removes people. Because yeah, those houses are selling, may sell for more than $1 million, but the folks that sold them didn't make anywhere near that. Because I had no problem with, honestly, with Black people actually having survived like so much of the crap that they did in those communities, actually reaping the benefit of generational wealth. I am 100% for it. I'm not gonna lie. It's like, and I say that as a person, because that same house that my dad, bought, when both my parents died, I could not get my siblings to hold on to that land. Okay, could not, because to them, it was like, it was cute what I did. It was like, oh, it's cute, your community and stuff. But it's not that cute, because we're gonna move to Virginia, we're gonna move to Jersey, we're gonna move wherever. And sold the house to a predatory speculator. And that house is worth 3 times more. And I don't have any children, but yeah, I was just like, y'all all got children. It would be nice to pass this down to somebody. Couldn't. So the things we do not talk about at Christmas dinners. So again, but if we're like creating opportunities for people to be, considered a protected class, so that predatory speculators, and right now private equity in particular is making a killing off of increasing wealth inequality in this country. Literally separating people from any hope for an American dream, because apparently like they've bought, I think about 15%, of homes in America. They're not like the wealthy, like they ain't going to Park Avenue buying these things. They're going to like small towns in Kansas, they're going to inner cities. That's where they're buying and taking those completely off the market for anybody who wants their American dream. So that's a lot of property. That should be considered a criminal offense in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, they're not going to jail. It's like nobody went to jail after 2008 either. They're not going to go to jail now. But again, if you protected them, if there were like, if there was like a stopgap measure, within the, anytime like a sale was about to happen in a low status community, the same way if you are accused of committing a crime, you'll get a public defender, because the law is complex and people don't understand. Same thing should happen in the world of real estate development in low status communities, because people don't understand. My family didn't understand. To them, it was just like, that was more money than they'd ever seen. And it was just like, and at the time I hadn't even like graduated to the thinking that I have right now. It was just like, I was like, this is a home. Like it's a place. Like if something happens, like we'll have a place to live. And they were just like, no, it's never going to be anything. And yeah, it is almost worth $1 million.
And what about the demystifying what you actually are doing in the community?
Oh,
So they don't look at you as this carpetbagger.
some people will, and there's nothing I can do about it. Not a daggone thing. So, but for the others, then it's for real. Like writing this book, like it's so woman I met, just told her I wrote a book, bought my book. She had actually sold her house. It was in that 3-day waiting period. And she said, and so she saw my book and she was about to sell it, and then she was like, oh, let me sit down and read it. Read it in one sitting, in a few hours, and then was just like, oh my God. She called up her broker and said, cancel the sale, because I'm not selling my child's inheritance. I'm good. Another woman just the other day actually heard, I was on she was in her local grocery store. This is up in the Bronx. And somebody, like, I guess an interview that was being played, or a podcast, as she described it, at the grocery store. And I come on talking about this book. And she was just like, well, that sounds interesting. Didn't know that she had a 100-year-old mother whose brother had died. His kids had sold their share of the house. And she was just like being harassed by the investor group. And she called us up because she heard me on a radio show. And And so now, you know, she's connected with pro bono lawyers so she can try to fight this and keep her family's house. So all that to say is that I'm just grateful that just the idea of people feeling that they can act, that we can do something on our own is a truly important piece for me. Like, that's what makes me like realize like, okay, that's why I did this. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for coming in. My name is Javon Francis. I'm first year at Columbia Business School. I think for me, this really hit home because I was born and I spent my entire childhood in the Bronx up until going to college. And I really do feel like the behavioral, or not really behavioral, but the mindset component is the hardest battle. Like, it doesn't surprise me when you said that people started protesting you, because I imagine that they don't see in their neighborhood the idea of a coffee shop. I remember when I moved back to New York City after spending some time in Texas, and I went to the Lit Bar, like my first reaction was like, what is this doing here? But then I had to rewire.
Right.
And I've noticed that my entire life. I left New York City, I was celebrated, when I was returning, a lot of warnings of don't bother moving back to the neighborhood. So how do you think you can battle that mindset component?
Right.
Because I feel like that really is the toughest part.
It's the lifestyle infrastructure. It is the lit bars. It is the boogie down grinds. It is the cool parks. It is, you know, seeing, you know, people that you look up to, like, stay in your neighborhood and see value there, and explaining why they do. And that, you know, that's the real thing, because, and it's not going to be all of us that are going to do that. It's not, but, you know, but I know I can speak with authority, you know, that we have literally like made many people in our community in Hunts Point alone, you know, just give the neighborhood a second look, despite the crazy that's going on around us, because we still are, you know, like I've got, you know, the fan club's still active, but there are so many other people who are just like, no, I'm staying, I'm building, and that's what we do. Because, and again, it's not going to be everybody, and that's okay. That is okay, and it's not lonely when you realize that, like, wait, there are other people who feel the same way. But that's why building a spot, like a third space, was so important, because people would leave the neighborhood and probably never see each other. And now, I mean, we literally see on a daily basis people who lived around the corner from each other for decades, and had no idea there was somebody that daggone cool in their neighborhood. They thought they were the only one. which is, you know, kind of beautiful in its own way, but at the same time, you know, it's so much cooler to be beautiful together. It just is. So, and I feel like that's what we have to do. Like, I can't tell you, one of the proudest moments was when you know, a couple, actually two folks that had met at an open mic at the Boogie Down Grind, they met and had a baby. And I was just like, we did that. I mean, not really, but, you know, but it was just like, we created this space. So this beautiful couple to get together. And it just makes me really happy, because it would not have happened. They would not have met. Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question. So how do you combat, because the part of Bronx that I grew up in is a very heavy Jamaican enclave. And you do have some of the heaviest immigrant enclaves all throughout the Bronx.
Yep.
And for a lot of those communities, even if they're first generation or second generation American, they still don't view the neighborhood as theirs, because their parents came as a sort of either pit stop,
Yep.
where they're gonna make this work
Yep.
for a little bit and then go back. But there's not that attachment.
Nope.
Like, this is mine. So
Yep.
how do you combat that as well?
Again, well, there is a lot of that, no doubt. I mean, and it just, but there's also, you know, we've noticed that the younger generation generally tends to feel like there's a little more connect. So either my generation, and I'm in my 50s, And then a younger generation who's kind of like, okay, but we can chill together a little bit. And again, it is not everybody, because believe me, there's a whole bunch that still like now that it is, predominantly immigrant community in my neighborhood now, like don't see me as legitimate. And it's just like, and look, you're not gonna please everybody all the time. You're just not. So you find your people, you find your tribe, and you build the space so that people can like chill together. And that's really the most important thing that you can do, and be comfortable with it. And then sooner or later, folks either they'll stop, being, so oppositional, or they'll just like find something else to do, then I feel like that's okay. Cause that's, but that isn't that level of diversity, that's really what we want, right? Like being able to pick and choose something different to do in your neighborhood. Like right now, there really isn't. Like we are it in Hunts Point, which is like annoying, because then if you go to like where the Lip Bar is, it's like there's the chocolate bar, there's like the barbecue place. There's like all sorts of fun. So it feels like, oh, like I can do stuff here. But I mean, I just go back to like, what are the creature, like, I think it's a spiritual thing. Like people like are designed to like wanna feel good about where they are. It's like we're constantly craving a connection with other people and with like the environment around us. And even though like things in our lives like make it so that we don't have it, and then we kind of act out sometime, that's really what we want. So, and and it didn't, what happened in my neighborhood didn't happen overnight. It took many years. So I guess, patience, is a strength in this regard, because it's like, we're going to keep doing it. And people being inspired by the kind of thing that they didn't even know was possible. That's what's the piece that moves me the most, is because then it becomes like, because I'm getting old and tired, which is very true. But I get completely bolstered up by seeing what's coming up, behind me, which I know is going to be way better than anything I've ever done. So I'm good with it.
We can do one more question.
We can do two.
Two.
Okay, yeah.
I'm Alexis.
Hi.
I'm not a student here, but thanks for having me, guys. And I kind of just want to push a little bit and challenge some, so I hope that you forgive me. But
Push.
I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. Similar kind of situation, I feel like. And the same thing is the mindset thing. And my question is, the solution works. It makes sense. The community will start growing and start building. It'll sustain itself because, when we start staying in our communities, we'll, funnel the increase in money that we're now getting, because of whatever reasons, education, whatever it is, we'll sustain these things. But to me, that doesn't completely like that doesn't like close the gap between, folks who would have left but choose to stay, and the folks who, were never going to leave, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when I think about the building that, or the community that the project that you guys had proposed, and with the like mixed income housing and things like that, I'm kind of skeptical, I think, in my understanding, the absence of like really, trying really hard to reach, that other side of the population, because, they are supposed to be going in and getting access to that low income housing and things like that. And if you don't get those folks to come and join and think that it is great that all these things are happening, that it is great to incorporate all these, supposedly white people stuff into the communities and things like that, then yeah, it'll sustain, because then, like I said, you'll have folks like the people in this room kind of coming back into their own communities, but it's not really solving like half of what I think is the issue.
Well, yeah, and listen, it would take, from what, I don't even remember the number, but it's something like hundreds of years to really solve it.
282 years by today's economic standards, and that was before COVID. So after COVID, it's even longer. But
Yeah, what she said.
Published the article 2018.
Right. Yeah, what she said, literally. But but what's the alternative is something that we know that just continues to concentrate poverty and all the things associated with it, just statistically. Like the Center for Policing at Yale literally can talk about stuff like this and how it absolutely continues the cycle that we're doing. The issues around health outcomes and public health. If we're going to see more of it if we do the same thing. So I'm not saying it's a silver bullet at all. So I don't think that a talent retention strategy is going to solve poverty level economic maintenance or gentrification, or even, certainly not dismantle capitalism and everything associated with it. But I do know that none of those things will be solved unless we actually use some talent retention in it. Yeah. But I hear you and I feel you, believe me, but I'll be that person who's like standing on a beach with the starfish. You heard that thing? It's like, somebody runs up to the person throwing the starfish back. And they said, and they're like, "What are you doing? You're not going to save all those starfish." Well, I saved that one. That's like that child's inheritance. Like people, like they get that, and I'm like, good, amen. So I do feel better about that, and I'm doing what I can. That's all I can do. Yeah, I don't know God's plan. I just know mine. But thank you I hear you. Believe me, I hear you. Drives me crazy too. Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. So I just had, kind of building off this like lifestyle point, they talked a lot about, how do you think about the businesses that are already there to begin with, maybe contributing to, food desert status or something like that, as a business leader in the area, how do you engage with them to maybe think about how to like reinvent themselves? Is that even the right answer? Like,
there's been like on that, like literally like the poverty level economic maintenance side, there are absolutely the kind of businesses that fully take advantage, of it. Like some of the bodegas that are taking advantage of the idea that cannabis is becoming, more accessible right now. And those are the places where it's just like, no, children or adults should be this, but they are taking advantage. Not all of them, definitely not all of them, but some of them absolutely are. And, I'm not so sure there is much engagement, with them. I really don't. I think just, it's like some of the, whether it's like, the continued, the predominant forms of things like, health clinics, or the kind of places that are taking, kind of undue advantage, of the cannabis industry and creating a much more toxic environment for everybody to live in. I feel the same way about, those kind of, economic developments as I do, about the way that things are done, in climate change, because I really feel like if we had treated all communities as if, as if they were wealthy white communities, like we never would have had the climate issues that we have right now, because we wouldn't have drilled the way we did. We wouldn't have just toxified, so much of the places that mostly low status communities live in. Like we just would not have done it. So, and the same thing I think happens around economic developments in low status communities. I really think so. So it's kind of like, oh, that's where they go. That's where they belong. And it's okay, because as long as they're not going to someplace else. So until there are actually policies that literally go, it's not okay anywhere, we're going to see stuff like that. But in the meantime, that's why it's really important for some of us to actively look toward creating the kind of lifestyle infrastructure that makes people feel like, no, we're going to create the kind of good uses that will drive out the bad ones and make them feel less comfortable, in our communities. And it's really because there's no cavalry coming to save us. There really isn't. Not, well, we are the cavalry. That's what it is.
Thank you so much.